Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, a podcast that features conversations with speedrunners, developers, content creators, and everything in between. This is episode 66, and once again, a conversation with myself. I'm calling this episode Learning from Failure. And I've gotten back into the speedrun grind recently. This is being recorded in mid-February of 2022. And for the end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022, I was looking back at some of the things that I had been doing in speedrunning and gaming and all that kind of stuff. And 2021 was tough for me to spend a lot of time with gaming just because of life stuff, work and things like that. And I noticed that I hadn't had a personal best, a PB, in 7 or 8 months by the time the end of 2021 came around. And I thought to myself, I need to change that. Or do I? I don't know. Maybe it was time for a break. When I'm looking back on it, obviously I had to prioritize real life for a bit. But on the flip side of that, maybe the break was actually good for me. But it gave me time to reflect and recollect on things and some approaches I had been taking to speedrunning, perhaps previously, or things that I could learn from it. And I'm of the opinion that a lot can be learned from failure. And if you think about it, speedrunning is, if you don't learn from failure, you're probably not going to be able to speedrun too much because an overwhelming majority of the time, 90% of the time, some huge number, we are failing when we speedrun. If you think about it, it's kind of like, I think equating it to baseball is actually kind of an interesting corollary, because baseball, if you succeed 30% of the time, you are making millions and millions of dollars in professional baseball. If you have a 300 something batting average, you're doing pretty well for yourself. I think a lot of speedrunners, if we were successful 30% of the time, we would be probably ecstatic with that. If we were getting a personal best 30% of the time, that's like wild. I'm not even sure if that's possible. I'm trying to think of runners that could actually do that. And I guess let's take this back a second. How do we measure success, right? Getting a personal best, yes, is absolutely a measure of success in our own running and stuff, but that's not necessarily the only signs of success. And I've really started to think about these type of things as I've continued on and really gotten into a grind the last 3 or 4 weeks. So I've set a few goals for 2022. I think I mentioned in one of the podcast episodes. And the first one was going to be to get a sub 24-minute run in Bonk's Revenge. And I started that grind. And it wasn't necessarily a grind because I have to learn some new strats for the game. There is a lot that's changed in the game since the last time I put significant time in it. And so I just need to learn some things. And I started doing that for about a week or so. And I can't quite remember what led me to, I was going to do, okay. So what ends up happening is I'm going to spend 3 or 4 weeks grinding a game called Alice in Wonder Dream. Fushigi no Yume no Alice. It's also a PC Engine game, didn't come out in the States. And we had a wonderful English translation that happened recently. And so I was playing through that, and I started playing the game again, and it started to feel a little bit good underneath my fingers. So I was like, you know what? I think I need to spend some time with this right now. I took a little break from my learning of Bonk's Revenge, which I'll be returning to very soon now that I've gotten some of the times I wanted in Alice. But it reminded me that there is a process that is always evolving to learning a speedrun, or at least to grinding a speedrun. I shouldn't say learning, because most of the stuff I thought I had learned in Alice, little did I know I had not. So one of the things that also made me kind of analyze and start thinking about my own speedruns was I had one particular stream of attempts, and I used the F word more often than I normally do. Now, in my regular life, I enjoy using the F word. I find many different uses for it. When I'm streaming, I try not to use it as much. And I think there are other ways we can express our emotions. And, I teach high school students. So I know high school students use bad words and all that kind of stuff, but at least if people want to watch with their kids or all that kind of stuff. So I do want to make a conscious attempt, but I had a stream where apparently I didn't care at all. And I was just going to use the F word as much as I can. And I was like, what led me down to that path? Why did I get there to that moment, So all of this stuff kind of mixed together and has led me onto this path to trying to analyze some of the things that I can learn from some of the things that I've been doing. And I call them failing, but it's the grind of doing a speed run, right? So I think one of the first things to do is to set some goals. And I know goals aren't for everyone, but even if it's not as clearly stated or as blunt, there is a goal you're probably trying to shoot for, regardless if you like verbalize it or say it out loud or anything like that. And it reminded me back to, I got an undergraduate degree in business. I didn't go to college until I was like 30 years old, but I did get a degree in business, and we use these things that I've used in many of my professional jobs and stuff. And folks who work in a corporate environment or a corporate setting are probably very familiar with this, but this may not be anything new to you, but we use this thing in business. We call it a SMART goal, and it's actually kind of helpful for speedrunning if you think about this. So it's just an acronym. All the letters stand for something. SMART goal stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. The time-based, interestingly, what really directly applies to us, right? How long of a span do you want to spend on grinding out your speed run? So I decided to actually kind of use this when I was planning out what I wanted to do with Alice. I knew that I wasn't happy with where my times were. And in the warp list category, I had a 14 something. And I know the first thing that I wanted to get to was a sub 14-minute run in that one. And there are a few different ways you can go about doing it. But if you think about to make it specific and measurable, okay, I can absolutely make that goal. That is a specific goal and it's absolutely measurable. Attainable, absolutely. My sum of best was already being reported. I think it was about 1340 something, like a high 1340 when I was starting my grind for Alice. So it was absolutely attainable. And obviously it's relevant and time-based I didn't put too specific a time. I wanted to try to get it done in a month so I could get back to Bonk's Revenge learning, but definitely relevant to what I was doing. If you think about if you want to set your goals, this is a really handy or easy way to help you set goals. If you've never had to do this, or if this is the first time you're actually trying to think of like being specific with this. So SMART goals, thanks business degree, thanks corporate environment, I guess, for helping out. Who would have thought you'd be thinking about this when it comes to speedrunning? Speedrunning should be fun and stuff, right? This is super like intuitive and easy. It's not like something you have to maybe you want to set it down. I like setting mine actually on a spreadsheet, taken from Lack Attack, who does this quite a bit. So I decided to set out a goal, the sub 14-minute run for Alice. And the first thing that I guess you could say I was dying a lot as I was trying to relearn the game and things like that. But this one stream where I had used all these F words and had failed kind of a bunch, I was just kind of really like frustrated and I wasn't quite sure. Like during the stream, I was not getting better on each individual run. I couldn't figure out, like, I know this game. Why can't I focus and get this thing going? And one of the things that I noticed after the stream was done was I started watching some of my attempts. And I know not everyone has times to watch, hours longs of your attempts and stuff like that. But I was like, I'm noticing that I wasn't executing very well. And I know that sounds like something pretty straightforward, but in the moment, I thought I was actually executing fine. I thought I was doing all of the inputs where they needed to be done well enough to be doing good speedrun attempts at the game. Turns out I wasn't. And I wasn't able to notice that until after the fact when I watched it back. And it got me thinking, man, how much time am I leaving on the table just from execution? We're not even talking about different strats or different techniques that may help out with different boss fights to make them faster and stuff like that. And what really opened my eyes was watching Epic Neon Ninja Monkey's world record run. I was like, something's not adding up here. Like, I'm way behind, I think, where Epic is, and we're doing the same exact strats. And so I loaded up his video and I started timing my own attempts to his. And it turns out just from execution, like it's a lot of platforming in the game and then there's some menuing, just from those executing in platforming and menuing, by the time like the third world rolled around, which is about half the run, I was like 20 and 30 seconds behind just because I wasn't executing at the same level that Epic was. And I was like, I can execute better. Why don't I spend, instead of like, trying to spend time on trying to get some of the more faster boss strats in that might save me, save big chunks of times, 5 and 8 seconds and stuff like that. I was like, why don't I spend my time practicing the execution of the game, the platforming, the jumping, some of the firing stuff. And it had a little bit to do with routing, but mostly it was execution. And I noticed literally the next stream when I started doing that I was getting out of World 1, I was progressing fast, but also, more importantly, I was saving a ton of time doing this off my PB. And it was really helpful that I had done some analysis outside of the actual attempts. And so I guess my point, or something perhaps think of for your own speedrunning, is analyze some of your failure after the fact. When you're in it, it's really, for me, it's really tough to be like differential, like to be, I'm going to put the emotions aside for a second. But when I did it after the fact, when there wasn't a chat going on, when there wasn't streaming, there wasn't all the other kind of things going on, I was able to be really objective. And I was like, man, Matt, you're just not cutting it right now. And it helped. It almost like was mind, opening my mind. I've been speedrunning now for 5 years. And I was like, why haven't I spent more time doing this sooner? Because I remember I definitely have spent a fair amount of time watching other people's runs, but then how to apply that to my own runs really shed some light on what I was doing. And I feel silly that it took that long, but super thankful that I actually got to that place. And hence why I wanted to share it and bring it up, because I think it's something we might not always be aware of. I know I wasn't. So maybe that's the same thing for you. There is another thing that I think is kind of important to that whole aspect, and that is that I had some help from other people who run the game. In the case of Alice, there's only one other runner, Epic Knee Ninja. But I will say that just being able to ask somebody about what they're doing and how they're doing it was super helpful. They may say do the same thing that you're doing, but they might give it to you in a way that you hadn't thought of before. And having somebody to chat about that, I know many games don't have, big communities, or don't have communities that are more than one person sometimes. And so it can be tough to find those things. But you never know what might happen if you ask somebody to look at your run who hasn't played the game. And having that outside perspective can really shed some light on things. Epic Knee Ninja Monkey, I got to give a huge shout out, because he's really into and good at the execution of the games that he runs. And so, when I heard him speaking about it, and when he talked about it, it opened up my eyes to the fact that I was leaving time on the table just basically by platforming slowly, and it was helpful in the moment and the situation. I know it can be tough, especially for those that are more introverted and stuff. It can be tough asking or putting something out there, but if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, you know that you'll never know what happens until you ask. And it can be a challenge to take that first step, but most of the people who you're asking about the game, who are good or who have some experience with it, are really passionate about the game. They love talking about the games that they run. Most of us don't run games unless we really like them. And, I bring up Mitch a lot because it's super interesting. Here's a person who makes his full-time career off of playing Super Mario Brothers 3 and streaming this and speedrunning. And yet he'll still talk to you about SMB3 stuff, which is kind of wild, right? You can, if you were a Super Mario Brothers 3 runner, you can go in their Discord and talk to the people who are the best in the world at this game and ask for their advice on how to use some things. It's always fun too, seeing people who first start streaming their attempts for the first time, and you'll see world record holders in their stream, rooting them on, and also offering help and guidance if they need it. So don't be afraid to ask others, even if it's somebody that may not be running your game or something like that. You never know what can help and what can come about from something like that. I mentioned I'm recording this in February of 2022, and Summoning Salt just released a really great video on the history of Super Punch-Out, and it's a lot of Zallard, but then there's this really great storytelling that goes on with people who have done attempts, in the last few years, and there's this moment that happens where Fat Potato Seal is on this almost unbelievable run. The luck apparently in Super Punch-Out is super high in certain fights, where it's just the probabilities of getting the perfect RNG are, very, 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 very low. And Fat Potato Seal gets this run going that goes through almost all of the fights except for the very last one on a godlike RNG run. And after you've gone through all that, you have to execute on the very last fight. And unfortunately, he doesn't, and the whole run just basically goes to hell in one fight. And it is absolutely devastating to watch and to see happen. However, I think that's a really great moment that a lot of us can learn from, because even you may have to deal with like the most crippling defeats when you're speedrunning. I know I have. It happened during my Alice grind here. And I will say that even though some of them can be really, really, really just like painful, I feel like I've learned something from all of those failures. And perhaps because I'm become a little more optimistic person by nature, I know it's not always easy to turn around and do some of those things. But if you can take a step away and think about things objectively, you can really learn, even from something like that where the RNG was perfect and you still didn't execute. What happened? Like, why? What were his nerves? Was it just something that you couldn't? It might have been technological for all we know. Maybe he just wasn't able to react fast enough to what he was seeing on screen. There was some of that going on with Super Punch Out, and I have found, once again, just looking at it after the fact and thinking through some things like logically and practically have helped out. For me, one of the things I found too during the Alice grind was taking a little bit of a break in there. When I say Alice grind, I've been playing like 3 or 4 times a week, which for me is a lot. I know others will play 5 times a week. And especially if you're a professional streamer, it's not always easy to put the game down for a minute. And I totally get that and understand that. But you'll never know what happens unless you do actually take a break. There are there's many different techniques to disassociate and, to put things aside for a moment, walking, drinking water, petting the dog, whatever works for you. But finding that thing can be almost as important as the runs you're doing themselves. It's funny because we make fun of things like rage quitting. Yet, the more I've been thinking through some of this stuff, there actually is some value to rage quitting. I know I've done it, and at the time I'm like, man, I'm a quitter. I'm rage quitting. I'm giving up on this. But actually, the more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, you know what? That was probably a good time to step away. If I was so angry and upset and so frustrated that, I had to bring myself to using the bad language, throwing the controllers, the whole thing. Thankfully, I haven't thrown any controllers, but I've definitely dropped them out of frustration. Also because, I've spent so much money on all the consoles and stuff. I'm like, I don't want to break these things, but man, I get the emotions, the blood pressure just rises. Rage quitting isn't a bad thing. Let's look at rage quitting as a little more of a positive and perhaps something that we could learn from as well, and is good for the headspace that we take these breaks. I know for me it's helped out quite a bit. When I finally came back and have gotten some PBs in the Warpless category, almost all of the PBs have come from breaks. One of them was at the end of a 2.5-hour stream, but the other 2 or 3 of them were early on in the streams after I'd come back, taken a day off, or come back after a longer break. I was prepared, I was rested. I had a fresh and optimistic outlook on things towards the beginning of a stream. So I know that helped me. I'm not, sometimes, I've seen streamers and speedrunners after the end of a 5 or 8 hour session, come back and then PB after they've been grinding for that long. This is just another technique. Maybe this works for you. Maybe it doesn't. I also think that there is something to learning and practicing from failure. And what do I mean by that? Well, Bonk's Revenge is a great example for this. I have to learn new strats in Bonk's Revenge. One of them is a lot of it is in the last final boss fights with King Drool. But another thing that's happened is that there's a Rocket Man fight at the end of like round 5 or something, round 6. I'm sorry, and I've only executed the correct strat like 3 or 4 times in my life, and I probably have like 1,000 attempts or something on the game. So if you just do like a pure percentage, I've done perhaps the right strats like 0.001% of the time, or I guess it'd be 0.01% of the time. And I've done the wrong strats 99 point something % of the time. Like we talk about this, like, I'm a teacher or whatever. We talk about this in educational circles. Like if you practice the wrong thing, you are setting more often than you do the right thing. You're setting yourself up for failure. They're just the numbers, And so, well, how do you fix that? Okay. So I've been thinking about this, and I'm going to be actually implementing this with my return to Bonk's Revenge. And that is, once I get the right thing, I have to do it more times right than I did wrong in practice. And I know a lot of speedrunners intuitively know this and do this, but actually practice that and do it. So once I get my Rocket Man strat back down and back underneath the fingers, my goal is to do it 10 times right more, at least 10 times more right than I did it wrong. And hopefully doing that before I do attempts, because it's that important. I don't want to it's in round 6 of 7. So this is, you're more than halfway into the run by the time you get to that fight. You don't want to have to keep resetting from that point on. You've already spent all this time on it. So it's a small thing, but also like an important thing to make sure that you're doing things right more often than you're doing them wrong. And that's just a great approach to practicing, but also like for the bigger picture of things. Way back when, one of the earlier episodes I did of this podcast was with Enemy, and he has a little bit different approach than I did at the time to speedrunning. He wouldn't continue on with the run until he got things right. And what I mean by that is he didn't do a ton of no reset runs because he didn't want to develop bad habits. And I thought that was at the time, I thought that was really interesting. But for me, especially probably because it's on the TurboGrafx 16 where we don't have access to save states, it's been challenging for me because I feel like for me, I want to get practice on the entire game. But there is absolutely value and something to be said for doing things more often right than wrong. I know, doesn't that sound like kind of like straightforward and like common sense and everything? But for me, at least I know these, and I say these things out loud, but I hadn't been implementing them. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Damn it, Bonk's Revenge. I'm going to make a conscious effort to apply that, and I'm hoping to at some point later down the line return to some of these ideas and see how many of them I executed well on. Obviously, the Alice stuff I know because I've had like 4 or 5 PBs in the last 2 weeks, so I know that stuff has been working. But also some of this other stuff that perhaps could work for it. And the other thing, and this has come up where, okay, I'll be streaming and I'll apologize to the audience for failing so often. Sorry we're having to watch World 1 so often. Probably boring, right? The more I thought about this, and this is once again where I was like, after the fact, I'm done with my stream, I'm watching this back, I'm like, this is speedrunning. This is, first of all, kind of like as an audience, why we enjoy watching this, right? We enjoy sharing and experiencing the failure with the runner because it makes those payoffs, those successes so much better. And I guess my thought, or what I was trying to get to at this point, is that we don't have to apologize for our failures. And I don't know if that's something that's a culture thing here in the States or not. It's tough to tell because I don't live other places. But I know that, we're wildly accepting of failure in the States. And so when you're getting into that grind and you're failing a lot, even let's say if it's on the World 1-3 like I did in Alice a bunch, we don't have to apologize for that. That's our learning experience. That's how we get better at what we're doing. And on the flip side of that, it is also what I think makes speedrunning so compelling. I've been trying to think of some ideas like, why do I enjoy speedrunning so much? Like, it's not just that I enjoy doing it, but I really enjoy watching it. Still to this day, most of the streamers I watch are speedrunners. There's still a few that are more variety and things like that. But I'm like, why do I enjoy watching this? What's so compelling about this? And you're telling your story, like all of these failures lead up to those great moments of success and make it all the much better because you sacrificed and you went through, if you were to write this down like in a script form for a movie or something, think about this, man, just keep hitting a wall, fail. Success, big deal, because you've spent so much time failing. I mean, why do you think we love sports movies so much in this country? All of them are basically the same setup, right? There's all this failure, and then in the end, there is some sort of triumph or some sort of success. More often than not, it's like winning a game or something like that. But there's also other ones that aren't necessarily, maybe we learned something in life, or maybe we have better viewpoints on society because of that. I mentioned it before, but I'm going to reiterate because I think it's important. We don't have to apologize for our failures. They are how we get better at what we do. They also are what makes speedrunning so great and so much fun to watch. Just my opinion, but I've come to realize that I don't know if I would enjoy speedrunning as much, watching it at least, if I was just watching people's PBs and world records. I love getting the story. I think what also has influenced or impacted this was Summoning Salt's most recent video, but all of his videos. One of the things I think Salt does so well, and if you're at all interested in it, go back and listen to the Summoning Salt podcast episode, is that he gives you these moments of when things were happening on godlike paces, as we call them, and then you see the complete obliterated heartbreak of losing some of these. In the most recent Super Punch-Out one, it was obviously poor Fat Potato Seal. But throughout all of his videos, he highlights this stuff. And it's one of the things where I think that's why I enjoy Salt's videos so much, but then also this great, activity of speedrunning and video games and stuff like that. Here's the big wrap up. And what is that all just to say? Well, folks, let's learn from our failures. Let's embrace them and let's use them as a tool to get better. I think there are more efficient ways, and there's always ways that we can learn and get better from our failures, but acknowledging them and embracing them, I think, is a really good starting place. And my guess is that speedrunners have been doing this since people have been speedrunning video games. I've just apparently only come to this realization 5 years into my journey. So I guess better to be to the party than, late to the party than never arriving at the party at all. Folks, thanks so much for watching and listening to some of my ranting. Hopefully maybe this is something that you can, that helps you out and makes you think about your speedrunning, or at least your viewing of speedrunning, anything like that. And as always, thank you so much for listening and watching, and hope you got something out of this. Thanks everyone for listening, watching, viewing, liking, subscribing, and sharing. All of that stuff goes a long way to helping out the podcast. If you'd like any additional info, you can go to sequencebreakpodcast.com. All of our past episodes, everything's on there. You'll find everything there. If you'd like to watch live, follow the Sequence Break Twitter. That is Sequence Break PC, and you can join in, ask some questions, watch the whole thing live. It does happen. It's not really a set time, but I do post when I go live. Everything else, if you have any questions or anything like that, podcast at sequencebreakpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.